Thank you so much. Thanks so much, everybody, for coming out. And since we are on such a tight schedule, I'll go ahead and get started. I think we should start off by defining diversity and inclusion, because those are two very different things, and they can, be impacted and enacted in your company in different ways. So, if we could kind of get started in talking a little bit about why that's so important and what that is.
Sure.
Sonja?
Sure. Okay. All right. So, hi, everybody. So, diversity, think of diversity as the things that you can see that make me different and the things that you can't see that make me different. All of those things help to create the kind of views that I have and the perspectives that I bring. So, when you look at me, you say, she might be black, she might be a woman, she might have an accent, and you start to realize that these are all different things that impact how I'm going to think. Then go a step further and recognize that it's all of those things. It's age, it's gender, it's race, it's whether or not I have disabilities, it's my socioeconomic status, how I grew up, where I grew up. All of those things that you know, that you think you know, and the things that you don't know that bring those perspectives. That's what diversity is, and we all have it. Think of inclusion as me bringing all those things to the workplace and feeling as though I can be exactly who I am. And be respected, be welcomed, and be heard in a workplace. And recognize that diversity and inclusion have to go together, to work together, to be successful in a workplace. And one last plug, try to not talk about diversity as a safe word. Talk about race. Talk about black people and Asian people and Hispanic people or Latinx people. Don't use diverse to say something that you're not comfortable saying, because that's part of what we're trying to do.
That's great. Do either of you have something to add on top of those definitions?
I think that one thing that I would add to that, and that was fantastic, so thank you so much for that, would be to talk about a shared sense of values in terms of how you build a culture that supports both diversity and inclusion within an organization or a community as well, and identifying what those values are, where they're lacking, and how you can make effective change to happen to aspire or achieve those goals.
Yeah. That's hard to top. The only thing I think I'll add is, in a tech context, the way we talk about diversity is those demographics that are underrepresented in our sector, but overly predictive of career, educational success over the course of a lifetime. So whether we like it or not, in 2017, race is still the primary way you can predict a lot about a person's trajectory in life, how long they'll live, how much money they'll earn over the course of a lifetime, having nothing to do with how smart they are. It's about how all of the systems are built to include or exclude people. And inclusion is what you do with the diversity once you have it. So simply saying we're going to get a whole bunch of people from lots of different backgrounds together and they're all going to work on this great product is not enough. Inclusion is the policies, procedures, language choices, the cultural norms that you have, the office space you build, the way you decorate your office, the way you celebrate wins. All of that can be about building inclusion as opposed to excluding some people and making some other people feel comfortable. So if you can be flexible in your culture, you're going to have a much better chance of creating an inclusive one than if you are very rigid over the course of time, but trying to diversify. So I think that's the only thing I would add.
So all of you have experience building really inclusive and diverse groups and companies, and I was just wondering if you could kind of talk to people, especially from a startup's perspective, what efforts you undertook to make that happen, what worked, and then of course, we can talk a little bit about what didn't.
Let's talk all day about what didn't work. Do you want me to go?
Yeah.
So my first job in diversity and tech was in 1999, at a time when it just was not on anybody's radar, really, and not in a broad way. And just for some historical context, it really wasn't a conversation that could garner this many people in a room until just a couple of years ago, when some journalists and some individuals in the field really pushed really put peer pressure on companies to release their diversity data. In 2014, 2015 is when the dam kind of burst on this conversation. So in 1999, you can imagine that it was like I was speaking a completely different language, but the first startup, which was in Boston, the majority of our engineering team was Native American. And it was the first time I ever saw the power of the cohort model, when people can work with each other and support each other in a culture that is different from the one that they came from, but they have all the skills to succeed and now need to rely on each other when things are hard, when things are confusing, when things need to change, and no single person was the only fill in the blank. And that for me was a really important lesson in that early stage startup. The second lesson that I learned is when money pressure is on, it is very easy for diversity and inclusion to be the first thing that goes out the window, the first and second things to go out the window. And so when we raised our first round of funding in early 2000, and VCs from here looked at our startup in Boston and said, what are you doing with all of these people that we don't recognize as, you know, normal engineers? They don't match our pattern. I think you've gone too far in trying to create a diverse staff. And we don't want to fund that. Once you're profitable, you can go back to that. And by then, it was really too late. So those are the two big lessons I learned there.
I think from our perspective, we've been doing like formalized diversity and inclusion efforts for about 2 years at Pivotal. And one of the first things that we realized, we're a company, we have offices all over the world. D&I means different things to different people in different locations, depending on all of the things of who they are. And we had assumptions going in around how to listen to people and how to garner feedback around what it is that they needed or wanted from a council and from policy. And it took us a lot of learning to understand how to really hear what was not only people were saying, but how they were saying it, through what channels, were there whisper networks that were going on underneath of all of this that people were having conversations about, and opening things up so that we could have better transparency around where people were feeling like they weren't comfortable or if they were threatened, and how we could actually make efforts to you know, accommodate, or the word that I'm looking for is not there, make them feel safer, make them feel more included. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think for us, one of the biggest things that we've learned, and this is still a work in progress, is that you have to have a culture that is both ready and supportive of what you're trying to do. And that has to be driven from the top down. It's all well and good to have grassroots efforts and have employees that want to do this. But unless this is something that is seen from the top as something that is just as much a business priority as figuring out where to store data or how many more users that you can try, it's not going to succeed. And we've been lucky at Asana in that it's something that we have commitment from the top, and we see that as one of the pillars that we support as we think about diversity and inclusion, and that it's seen as a business priority. And I think that's the thing that has probably been the most important lesson, that intention is great, but unless you drive it in the same way that you would anything else, it's not going to succeed.
So that kind of takes us to my next point, where you mentioned there were a lot of posts that were like, where are the numbers? And companies began releasing statistics and data about the makeup of their workforces. But it's much, much more than numbers. And I feel like that we haven't really seen the needle move much, especially at these really big companies. And a lot of it has to do with sustainable cultural changes and retaining that talent. So can you talk about maybe some tips or ways that you've seen work within your companies for keeping people, not just hiring people, but keeping them and making them stay long term?
From GitHub's perspective, one of the first things we invested in when we decided to take this on were affinity groups, which is sort of a step short of employee resource groups, because you can't force employee resource groups. Either people want to form them or they don't want to form them. And so by dipping our toe in affinity groups, and for those of you who know GitHub, we have the Octocat as our logo. And so the first group of black folks in our company called themselves the Blacktocats. And that really set a tone for people about this doesn't have to be a lot. They dispelled a lot of myths about what the affinity group was going to be about. And making sure that they have the resources to do two things. One, support each other, and two, loop feedback back to leadership. And for those who are part of leadership, to make sure that they feel like they can speak up without penalty on behalf of Blacktocats. That's a really important cultural element for us. Same with Latino Hubbers, same with same with Octoqueer, same with we now have these sprouting up. But what happened was giving people permission to organize themselves made it much more authentic, making sure they had the resources to do that and that they were seen. So our CEO will go to the Blacktocats Summit and say, hey, I'm here. He is not black. And he will say, hey, I'm here. I really want to hear what y'all have been talking about. What's the topic, top of mind? What is concerning you? What do you need? The other important part about investing in affinity groups or employee resource groups is that it is not to be seen as a model of deficiency, so that you say, what do these people need that they don't have? If you're not creating a loop where the affinity groups then inform the culture, you're going to miss a big part of what makes diversity and inclusion work. No, let's listen to folks who have been on the margins for a long time, talk about what's going to make the overall culture better for everyone. And when you design, to think, just like any design thinking, you have to think about designing for the margin. Because when you design for the most, or the least enfranchised group, everyone else gets included along the way. So if you're really thinking about, black trans women on your staff, you should be thinking about black trans women on your staff. You can build a culture where they feel like they can be their complete selves at work every day. Everybody is going to benefit from that. Yeah. And so that's a really important part about investing in these programs.
Yeah, and so Pivotal does similar things in that we have affinity groups as well as grassroots organizations at all of our offices around the world, and we invest in those with both cash resources that it's up to them in terms of how they choose to spend those. So we give them autonomy that helps to solve the needs and problems that they're facing within their own communities. As well, we focus quite a bit on retention. A lot of the work that we do is, there's quite a bit of skill development that we see as engineers, as product managers, as designers, as leaders. We want to invest and make sure that we're retaining the people, and we're also helping them climb whatever career path they want to climb. So we do things like sponsor and partner leaders with folks that are in underrepresented minorities or folks that identify as different, whatever that may be, to ensure that they have a peer that's going to help them along the way to navigate whatever kind of existing structure we have. As well, we also evaluate what those structures are from a hiring perspective, from a promotion and evaluation, incentivization perspective, and make sure that we're not trying to block people unintentionally through unconscious or implicit bias, and that we're creating allies throughout the organization to help them go forward. So we look at it both from a bottom-up and top-down perspective, and we're pivotal, so we iterate. So we're always gathering feedback on the process itself to make sure, is this actually working or is it not working? And sometimes it does, and sometimes it really doesn't, and we have a conversation about that, which is hard, but you have to.
Yeah, so +1 to everything that Dave said. One of the additions that we have is that we offer mentorship and coaching to all of our employees, and it's executive level coaching that's open to everyone, not just executives. The other thing that we do is that we really try to think about how are we looking at our engagement surveys. So we're looking at how are employees feeling beyond just the numbers, the demographics. How does that tie into people's feelings and sense of inclusion and belonging in the company? And we're trying to track that. We're small, so our numbers are, as you imagine, small. And I can probably talk to everybody. All right? And by that, I'm trying to get a sense of how people are feeling. But I'm just one person, and I want to make sure, and what we try to do is make sure that everyone feels as though they have safe spaces in the organization, that they can have those conversations that might be difficult to have with somebody who you're not sure if they are or are not an ally. So creating places where people know that they're allies in the organization, helping people understand how to be an ally, which is super important. Really trying to create those places and spaces that people can kind of engage.
So we have less than a minute, but I just want to ask you if you could, give us some resources that folks could look at if they're interested in working on this within their own company.
Project Include, highly recommended. Project Include has really advocated for looking beyond just the simple numbers and really thinking about this along a variety of lines. So reach out to them. They are willing to work with anyone regardless of size, and really helping you to think about this in a really intentional way. Something that Nicole said that I just want to re-emphasize. You have to understand that anything you do for the least group really resonates with everyone, and that really helps to create a culture that everyone benefits from ultimately.
+1 to Project Include. And also seeking out resources as well through workshops and through individual consultants that can come in. There's tons of people now that have leveled themselves up to be able to teach organizations how to identify implicit bias and then also how to act upon it, as well as ally training. So.
For those, so Project Include, related to Project Include is the Kapor Center. There are people here from the Kapor Center for Social Impact in Oakland. Raise your hands. They're doing things like investing in entrepreneurs of color in Oakland. They're a great resource. It is the one thing that all of our companies have in common is the Kapor Center. Funded, and I was a managing director there for several years. And so there is something about the ecosystem coming out of there that you should really keep your eye on.
Great, so we are going to go ahead and open it up to some questions.
Excuse me, but something of in this theme is actually what large corporations are working with when they have forgotten the people. And a lot of the guys in this room are really close to their people, and a lot of the people love this little atmosphere of 5, 10, 30 people. But sometimes the corporations, the big corporations, would like to refine the startup culture that everybody loved. But now you are actually telling us that it could be an idea to take on these large corporation compensating elements to create the startup feeling. Yeah. Can you understand my question? So this is one. The other one is, if I should adapt this as manager of my little company, startup company from Denmark, it should be a kind of pixie version, because as you know, the funding, the daily metrics and all that is so important for the small startups.
So I can take the first part. I'm not sure I heard the second part. I'm sorry, my hearing isn't great. I'm going to say something that's probably antithetical to a lot of what people have learned about doing D&I inside larger companies. And when I came onto GitHub, we were about 200. Now we're a little over 600. So still in the small to medium, right? But the big structural difference that I want to advocate for, and I'm going to start beating this drum loudly, is diversity and inclusion efforts cannot live buried inside HR. They just can't. It is the rare company, and forgive me if any of you are part of that, it is the rare company that can pull it off, and so maybe that is what's happening. But more often than not, I have seen diversity and inclusion efforts go into HR to die, and or be forgotten, and or be left to one junior person to try and figure this out, often all by herself. That is a recipe for disaster. She's given no budget, no staff, no mentorship, has never done this before, and is told, go fix our D&I stuff. You know people stuff. Now, that is not a dig on HR. That's not what that's about, and that's not a dig on her either. But it has become the structural norm to do this, and it is like, it's a Sisyphean effort. She's going to be stuck rolling that boulder up the hill and then chasing it back down again and rolling it back up. Yep. What you said was very important, that it has to come from the very top. One of the agreements that I had going to GitHub, which was in the middle of its own challenges around this, was that I needed to report to the CEO. Nobody in between. And bless him, he said, okay, we'll give it a shot. And so I get to sit on the executive team. I have my own team. I have my own budget. And I can experiment in a way that is not tied to the legal work of HR, which is very, very important. But our hashtag, our joke is hashtag not HR, because we can talk about things, we can move things forward in a way that HR cannot, for very good reason, because of what their function is. So if your diversity and inclusion efforts in a big company are buried deep inside HR, I would say that one of your first battles is to pull that out of there, figure out how to elevate it and get it the resources it needs.
We faced that challenge as well when we were first starting to do this work. And so for us, and your mileage may vary, but our solution was to create a council that was composed of various members across our organization. We have 2,400 people worldwide. And so we have people that represent various different locations and different divisions within the company. And that's been successful, but not without its challenges as well. But that's one of the ways that we can think about doing that. And I think, to your point around the big organizations, and I'll address the first part as well, to follow up, yes, it can't stay within HR, but also trying to think about what the goals are specifically that a company is trying to accomplish. And that's whether you're a large organization or a small organization. What needle are you trying to move? What culture are you trying to create? And having a really hard look at the kind of culture you've already established, because that's going to really inform what it is that you do going forward. Do you have a culture that values transparency and communication, or does not, as an example, or other things as well? So.
I would say maybe to his second point, how do you, thanks, when it comes to money, right? I mean, that's, you said people don't want to spend money on this. How can you convince people that this is worth spending money on? And even if you are a small startup, you just got your first seed round, how much of that goes to diversity and inclusion, and how can you make sure it's a priority?
So if you're trying to build your company, and if you're trying to recruit the best people, you have to think about the processes. And as you start to think about the processes, you're starting to integrate diversity into how you're hiring, into how you're retaining people. It becomes something that is part of what you're trying to do anyway. And it should be one of the things that's important to you as you build your company. It should just take as much precedence or priority as you're thinking about anything else. Because it ultimately helps everything else. So that's how I approach it in terms of thinking, okay, how are we doing this? This is important. This is what we need to spend on. This is what we need to do.
I would also refer you to a McKinsey study that came out in January of 2015, that ties revenue to diversity in a very elegant way. And it was sort of, for people who do this work, it was like the holy grail of trying to do it without that work for a long time, but you can really outperform your competition on the bottom line vis-a-vis diversity.
Hi, okay. Thank you all so much for being here. First of all, I'm trying to create my own D&I startup focused around mentorship. And one of my questions is, how do we involve people who are not really educated on this matter as mentors? How do we get them sort of to be proper mentors and give effective feedback? And yeah, that's kind of just my quick question.
One of the things that I would say about mentorship is you're going to have to use that pool, which you've already figured out, because there are so few people from underrepresented backgrounds to match. And many of us are already mentoring a lot of people informally or formally, right? We're all laughing like, yeah, you know, 7 people waiting for me to answer them on something right now. And that's an honor for me to do that. If you are getting to the point where you are now matching in other ways, keep it to the discipline at hand. One of the things that I think is very difficult for people who do not know a lot about diversity and inclusion is to say, all right, now you're going to mentor a young Latina, not me anymore, but 20 years ago. You're going to mentor a young Latina who is rising in the ranks and she really wants to know more about general management, right? And this person, let's say he's an older white guy, is like, oh my gosh, what do I have in common with her? Well, the thing you have in common is that she wants to learn how to do what you know how to do. And instead of treating me with kid gloves, give me hard feedback, give me real feedback so I can get better at the job. One of the management failures I see over and over again is people saying, I don't know how to give that person hard feedback because I'm afraid it'll break them. And it's like, you're not doing anybody any favors in that regard. Tell me how to do what I want to do better, because I'm also battling all these other things, so I, at a minimum, need to get the skill down. I'll handle the rest of it, and I'll find my interpersonal mentorship elsewhere, but teach me how to do this thing. Teach me how to be a product designer or a project manager so I can be really, really good at that. And don't put the pressure on mentors to be all things to all people. It's not big brothers, big sisters. It's teach me how to be, you know, an engineer the way you're an engineer. I think that's what I'd say.
I think that's it exactly. Mentors don't have to be all things to all the people. You know, I have people that I turn to for different things, and that's exactly how that mentor-mentee relationship should work for it to be effective.
Great. I think we have time for one more question.
He's been waiting.
He's been waiting, yeah.
Okay.
My question has more to do with the hiring process. I was wondering if you had any quick tips on attracting diverse talent, especially for smaller startups.
Great question.
That's not a quick question.
It's not a quick question, but all right, here's one thing that you should know. We all talk to each other. I could say names, so this room is pretty diverse just in terms of race and gender. I could say names of companies, which I won't, and I could say, all right, people of color in the room, how many of you would work at that company, and state the company, and be able to predict how many hands would go up or not, right? So I'll say a positive one, right? How many people of color in this room have heard good things about working at Slack, right? We talk to each other a lot in groups, and we know the stories of our friends. So one of the reasons why sometimes if your company is unable to attract talent from sort of new or unlikely communities is because your reputation's already out there. It's either unknown, and so people go, I don't know, you're gonna be the first one in, let me know how it goes, or it's already out there negatively, and we all know it, and it's like, stay away. When I used to have my own consulting firm, the one question I would ask people when I would get them in an honest moment confidentially is, if your younger brother or sister were working here and you weren't here to protect them, would you want them working here? And I would ask women from all backgrounds that, I would ask people of color that, and their answer told me almost everything I needed to know about what was going right or wrong in that culture, because people will go, well, I'm not here to show them the ropes. No, then no, right? And that is an important gauge. It's a pulse for how people are probably talking about your company. Now, you can't do that internally because there are other repercussions, but you can hire someone else to come in and find that out and interview people from underrepresented backgrounds in your company to find out what their experience is and give you an aggregate summary of what they're actually experiencing and talking about elsewhere. And not penalize them, but take that feedback to heart and fix it. Yeah. And that, I think, is a quick thing. I don't know.
The only thing I would add, yes, and start to engage with people. We're startups. People don't know what you do, right? And it's that much harder. They know about the tech sector and they know about the hurdles as fill in the blank in the tech sector. So you have to be really authentic. You have to be, these are my values, this is what is important to me, and not just say it, do it, right? You have to engage. You have to go where they are. They're not going to come to you. You have to go to those events. You have to build those relationships. That's how you engage. That's how people say, okay, they're not just talking, they're actually serious about this. And be willing to say, we don't have this right as yet if you don't. And we want to learn from this, right? So that's how you kind of be authentic and kind of build those relationships.
Great. All right, well, we are out of time. Thanks so much, everyone, for coming. And if you have any questions, please go to my